tribute from one of Dad's former mentees who couldn't be here today. Her name is Ranjana Srivastava. She's an Australian oncologist, an award-winning author, and a Fulbright scholar who met my dad during her year at the McLean Center. So in Ranjana's words, "I'm sorry I cannot be there in person to celebrate Bill's life, but I suspect he would have said something like, I don't care, I won't be there either." I met Bill in 2004 when I was a Fulbright scholar from Australia at the McLean Center, spelled C-E-N-T-R-E. I was a newly minted oncologist, a novice ethicist, and mostly a frustrated writer. I was in awe of the faculty who were not only physicians, but also writers, and I spent quite a few hours interrogating them about how they managed both. One day, again feeling unequal to the task, I said to Bill, "I really want to write a book." Beaming at me, he promptly said, "Sure, I can see you got a book in you." 18 years later, I still think that was the single exclamation that injected me with confidence to write several books, and in time, be a regular Guardian columnist on medicine and humanity. Bill didn't teach me how to write, but he gave me his belief in my ability. From 2005 to just before he died, he always took a genuine pride in my writing, which always moved me. I really miss seeing his email periodically pop up in my inbox. I love that piece. I especially like that writing. Well done, you. I will always remember Bill as my enabler. I must make a note of Bill's famous generosity. Every year when I visited Chicago, he insisted on treating me to lunch, managing to find some awful American eatery that served a mountain of pancakes with enough cream and ice cream to feed a small nation, and then a pile of sausages snaking their way up to a huge disc of a plate. I would shake my head in disgust, and he would laugh, and we would spend a pleasant hour or two exchanging news. He did this even when he was tired, and then in rehab, and I think we both recognized how precious that time was. The year before he died, he and I walked slowly to a restaurant near his house. His health was declining, but not his spirits. I was so grateful for this final time with him, and humbled by his capacity for friendship and goodwill. He would not have called it a sacrifice, but it was. I am a better person for knowing Bill. I suspect if I asked how I could pay him back, he would want me to pay it forward. I will strive to do just that. Rest in peace, dear friend. Next, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Bob Tanz. So my dad first met Bob in residency at Children's Memorial Hospital, where they formed a friendship that would last the next 45 years. Having done my NICU fellowship at Children's, which is now called Lurie, I got to hear many stories about Bob as an attending, which often reminded me of my dad. An example, when told by a resident that a patient played a sport, Bob would always clarify what position. I think Bob was to Lurie residents what my dad was to Comer residents, so it is my honor to introduce him.
That might be the nicest thing anyone ever said, though. So, I have a few memories. They start when I met Bill in late June 1977 at Children's Memorial Hospital. He came to see me for his third year of residency because U of C didn't have a third year at that time. He was assigned in July to the floor for older children, many of whom had cancer. Not exactly where you would want to start if you want to be a neonatologist. But it didn't matter. In the days of being on call, every third night, his junior residents, covering 2 out of 3 nights, were Joel Charo and me. Ira Schwartz, who couldn't be here today, was one of the 3 interns. A few months after he met, he invited my wife Jill and me to dinner. Jill didn't want to spend any more time with residents than she had to. But I said, Bill is different. So we went. Bill was different. As a resident, one night on call, he picked up dinner at the bakery, then a gourmet restaurant down the street on Lincoln Avenue from Children's Memorial Hospital. It was famous for its beef Wellington. At Prentice, the maternity hospital, he was known to sing Happy Birthday in the delivery room. He was a great friend, an occasional collaborator, and a thoughtful and creative researcher. I miss calling him and hearing him answer, Dr. Meadow, or Sometimes, hello, it's Dr. Meadow. He even answered the phone that way when he was sick in the hospital. We went to Bulls games, Sox games, Bears games. He was about the only person I could find who would go to a Monday night football game with me in November or December, the cold wind. He barked when the defense made a good play. Apropos to this week, he always said that when the Bears won, the week was off to a better start. The whole city just felt better. He loved sports radio, and when he called the score, he was Bill from Hyde Park. Our families had Thanksgiving and Passover together, and for many years, he made string beans with asparagus to go with dinner. But one day on the score, he heard a recipe for Brussels sprouts with garlic and bacon. It became his signature Thanksgiving dish. And it's the only Brussels sprouts that I'll eat. As many of you know, every year we room together at PAS, the annual pediatric research meeting. From the early 1980s until 2010 or so, maybe a couple years after, he always managed to get us a suite. He always took the sofa bed. He always brought several copies of New Yorker with him to read, and ESPN was always on TV. Sometimes we practice our talks, more often fellows and residents, mostly his, would come by to practice theirs. And it meant a lot when he would tell me that my resident or fellow did a good job. We talk about work or upcoming presentations. I remember him going on and on about the dean wanting to close beds in the hospital, and a full bed was better than an empty bed. I commiserated with him. He loved coaching, especially coaching his kids. There is nothing better than coaching kids, especially your own. He once told me, as a coach, to start my best pitcher in an upcoming Little League playoff game. You won't make the final if you don't win the semifinal, he said. Bill's bottom line, give it your best shot when you have the chance. Go for it today so you have a chance tomorrow. I think this plays out with babies in the NICU. He was creative. In 2010, in May, in Vancouver, I was watching a baseball game late in the evening in our room. Bill had been to dinner with other neonatology fellows and faculty, and he seemed really annoyed when he came back to the room. He couldn't convince anyone at dinner that all extremely premature babies deserve a trial of therapy because it would give you a better idea about their likely prognosis. My no-brainer comment while half watching the game on TV was something like, that's a no-brainer. You'd be more likely to pick the winner if you could bet on baseball after it started. 6 months later, he sent me a draft of an abstract for the following year's PAS entitled Betting on the Baby, the Moral Implications of a Trial of NICU Therapy. Xander had analyzed 411 Major League Baseball games from 2010 for that study. It turns out that the pregame betting favorite wins the game about 66% of the time, using whatever data they have available to establish the betting line. But after the 8th inning of an actual game, the team that is ahead wins about 94% of the time. Bill's analogy, just as knowing who's leading the game after 8 innings is a better predictor than the betting line, a trial of therapy will be a better predictor of a baby's prognosis than the data available in the delivery room. As a general pediatrician, not a neonatologist, it made some sense to me. And I think, ultimately, he made his point. Our last PAS meeting together was in 2018 in Toronto. It's not the same without him. Bill and Susan went with Jill and me numerous times to the International Landsfield Streptococcal Symposium every 3 years. Before he messed around with this bioethics stuff, he did research related to group strep. These meetings were way more memorable for the time we all spent together than for any science that occurred at the meeting. But a few things. In 1993, while we were in St. Petersburg, Russia, Bill sang Kalinka under a bridge. I can still hear his voice echoing. And all the people who stopped to listen or were just shocked that somebody in just recently communist Russia was singing out loud in public. The 2-hour banquet at the end of that meeting was notable for the lack of chairs. I don't mean not enough chairs, I mean there were no chairs. And Dr. Meadow won a teacup in a raffle. Susan still has it, I think. Bill could be pretty adventurous. In New Zealand in 1999, Bill and Susan and Jill jumped off a mountain in Queenstown. It's called parapenting, and it's kind of like hang gliding. They landed in a schoolyard. Oh, Jill, do you have my... So, on Queen Street in Auckland, we bought these hats. For those of you who didn't know, it's not a cowboy hat. In Australia, Bill decided we should stay in Sydney at a hotel that was a brewery, the Lord Nelson Brewery Hotel. So we woke up in the morning with the smell of hops. The hotel's in the city, in the shadow of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and along with Susan and Jill, this is a theme. I don't like high places. Bill climbed the bridge arches. We played golf, we snorkeled Great Barrier Reef, but best of all, every morning our kids texted us with its just ended White Sox score as they were on their way to the World Series. In 2008, we were in Israel. We traveled all over Israel with our guide, Meadow. On our last night in Tel Aviv, I dislocated my shoulder when the desk chair I was sitting in fell over. Bill went with me to a local hospital. It was a Friday night, the place was empty, and we sat in the waiting room. And while we were there, Dad brought his toddler son in with him. And he was distraught. He had dropped a paving stone on his little kid's foot. There was blood all over both of them. The kid was crying, and the dad couldn't calm him. Bill immediately went over, told him that we were doctors from America, and asked if we could look at his foot. You might ask, what did Bill know about foot trauma? It doesn't matter. He's a doctor, and he was going to help. I have one last story. I'll try to. It's a hard one. Last month, my daughter Rachel, who is a pediatrician also, had an emergency C-section for fetal distress at 36 weeks. She called me from a hospital in Salt Lake City a few minutes after the baby was born. He had severe anemia, presumably from a fetal maternal hemorrhage. Who knew it could be that bad? Rachel told me what had happened and what the neonatologists in Salt Lake City were planning to do. And almost simultaneously, we each said, I wish I could talk to Bill. Okay.
We're going to read some words from Kwang, who is a former colleague of ours.
I'm still much higher. I promised to be much shorter this time, but I did want to read a few remarks from Kwang Lee, who was the previous section chief of neonatology. And every year at PAS, at the Pediatric Academic Society meeting, we have a dinner for all of U of C neonatology. Whether you were ever a medical student, whether you were ever a resident, fellow, faculty, we were all there and everybody knew to come. And every year, Bill would introduce Dr. Lee as the best boss he ever had. Oh, and by the way, the only boss he ever had. Kwang and Ansuk, unfortunately, were in a bad auto accident, and Ansuk is still recovering. Otherwise, Kwang would be here. For those who know Kwang, my poor reading will reflect my poor reading skills, and Susan's going to work on that with me. But also Kwang's English. We are here today remembering and celebrating Bill Meadow's life. I am grateful for being with him for more than 30 years. I came to the university as a young, inexperienced, ignorant neonatologist in the year 1980. Bill was a fellow then and welcomed me. Knowing I came from Korea, Bill sang Ererang, a Korean folk song. Bill learned this song when he toured Korea as a member of the Glee Club at Amherst College. He had a beautiful voice. You might have heard how beautifully he sang Amazing Grace from his heart. Until his departure, he always sang to the babies in the NICU. Well, you may say he was loud. But Bill was very shy and tender inside. Bill loved all around him. Many students, fellows, nurses, and other faculty members adored him. Babies cannot talk, but no doubt they loved him too. He was a main force of developing the neonatal intensive care unit at the university. Often, when the section had difficulty, he came to my office and said, "Let's fight. I will be the bad cop, and you can be the good cop." Not that he shielded me, but for our section, he had a vision riding over waves. Bill was brutally honest, but respectable. Without Bill's contribution for the last 4 decades, the section would not be what it is now. In his research, Bill's investigation earlier on group B strep infection in piglets and human newborns was seminal work for all others to follow. For me, I think that his contribution to neonatal ethics was a landmark path for years to come. Bill has given us many questions to answer. Bill's work in neonatology, his scholarship, teaching, and mentorship are filled with respect from his students and colleagues near and far. But personally, I miss him much and still hear him saying, "Welcome to the NICU. You will love it here." I'm told to inform you, go ahead and keep eating. More to follow.